All right, quick video because I'm going to put a longer, more detailed video on Odyssey and Bit Chute, but it gets into politically incorrect, hot words that YouTube's not acceptable for. So this is fascinating, the history of TV, brainwashing, propaganda. And at the end of this article, there's a quote from Anton Levay, who's he's literally a Jewish Satanist from the 70s and 80s. Who wrote the Satanic Bible, and I read it, and it's not what you think it is. And I am all about calling out globalist subversion and the sinister path, left-hand path. That book would be wholesome and quirky if you read it today. It's absolutely not what you think it is, and you know how hard I focus on these globalist subversive types. But that book is been really, really misunderstood. It's just kind of a LARPing book for people who are not religious, and it's absolutely, you got to read it for yourself if you want. It's just not what you think it is. He, at the end of this article, gives a quote warning. He's kind of like this. The Satanic Bible it's just a LARPing spirituality for a guy who just wants to sell books, and it's not the sinister path that the title would have you believe. And he's actually not as sinister, even though he's obviously a globalist. He's not as sinister, and this is the one time I'm going to defend globalism literally with the name of Satanic Bible, and you got me defending it. It's just not what you think it is. He's not as sinister. The book's not as sinister as you think it is. It's a title that was probably edgy for the 70s to sell books, but it's just for people who are not religious, who want to have some kind of, and it's actually like you could kind of turn it around and make it based and just like quickly turn it into something like Scandinavian or the Roman and Greek pantheon, something like that. Anyway, so at the end of the article, he gives a warning about the literal Satanists, satanic, globalist, subversives, the literal ones, the real ones, not the LARPing ones who are just trying to sell books like him, who actually control the TV. He's talking about the TV he says, the birth of TV was a magical event. So the whole article is talking about the change of TV from the 50s was vaguely nationalist, patriarchal, Christian. It was like you knew this stuff was Christian focused. Even if they weren't exactly preaching, there were still Christianity undertones in the 50s of TV. And the crux of the article is about 1963, in the 60s, people had bought TVs. They had reached a saturation point. They were about over 90% saturation in the American market. TVs were expensive relatively at the time, so it wasn't something that they were going to throw out on a whim. And so what happened in the early 60s was TV started to get more subversive. And instead of things like Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, where it was nationalist, Christian, patriarchal, classical storytelling structure of European ideals type of thing, it switched into things like I Dream of Jeannie, Bewitched, and there's a couple other ones, and it's like, oh, those are like this hippy dippy 60 shows where there's witchcraft and it's real light. And I'm not one of those satanic panic people from the 80s. I've seen all those shows in reruns as a kid, obviously, being a boomer myself. They were harmless, right? But then you start to think about it, it's like, wait a minute, it's harmless. Yeah, for sure, they are legitimate. It's just girls in like polyester, cute girls running around and like twinkling their nose and doing witchcraft. And you think about it like, yeah, but the theme is witchcraft. That's a little bit weird, isn't it? And it's not presented from a European folklore perspective. It's presented from this other perspective, from the people who are pulling the strings on these kind of shows. It is harmless. Like those shows, you can go back and watch them, and they are not. There's nothing you can point to and say this is subversive. But you think about it, yeah, witchcraft. That's kind of weird. I mean, it's kind of a weird theme because like witches represent something in either European or Middle Eastern storytelling. It's weird that you try to turn that around. It goes like those shows in and of themselves. Yes, they were harmless. You could watch them, you wouldn't find anything weird in them. But they go, it's the slowly boiling frog, and then they started to subvert things. Like people look at Archie Bunker. And like a lot of our guys have misunderstandings on shows with Archie Bunker, Fight Club, Falling Down, even Pulp Fiction. A lot of movies are made by these globalist subverters, and they're made for they're hoping to get this certain point across. Like those movies I mentioned, you have to think back to the scenes in those movies, who was portrayed in a positive and negative light, and you get the idea. And then you have to look at the people who were making the writers, the directors, the producers, the actors on the shows, and who was making that show. And then you look and you're like, oh, they're globalists who are making this show for a certain purpose. Now, their purpose wasn't exactly carried off. They were trying to portray certain people in a bad light. And we watch the shows, and it's like, oh, these guys are based. Because we're interpreting it a different way, but it doesn't stop that their intention was committed at the time they committed the act of trying to do something subversive. It just didn't hit. Like, they were, even in Pulp Fiction, there was German guys who enjoyed each other's company, but who were into BDSM, and it's like they were the German guys with shaved heads. They were the bad guys, but they're also gay. Gee, Hollywood, what are you saying there? Or in Falling Down, they had a similar scene with that kind of stuff, and then you look and see like, well, who's writing these shows? Who's directing, producing? Oh, I see where you're going with this anti-German kind of thing. Oh, the Archie Bunker thing. So they slowly subverted Archie Bunker to being a conservative voice, but then they started turning him into something to be lampooned and made fun of because he was patriarchal, vaguely right-wing, vaguely nationalistic, vaguely Christian character, and they turned him into a buffoon. And he looked like, oh, who was a writer on an Archie Bunker show? Who was pulling the strings on that? Oh, you're gonna have to do that. I can't say it on YouTube, but you're gonna have to do the research yourself on that show. It's like, oh, so this is just globalist propaganda from back in the day. You went from, what was the show before? The Honeymooners, I think it was the black and white show where it vaguely had a moralistic lesson. It was, these things were all vaguely nationalist, Christian, patriarchal, all things that are good things that work. Combination of, European, Norse, Mediterranean mythology and structure, storytelling structure, mixed with Christianity, to form something that kind of mostly worked. It works as long as you keep these subverters completely out. So the article talks about the subversion that hit after the TVs had reached saturation point because the TVs were expensive. And so you go, witchcraft, bewitched. Maybe the folks in the South would have looked at that and been more suspicious. Credit to our southern brothers and sisters who are, more deeply rooted in at least the Christian framework, which made them much more suspicious of the people who were making TV and the Yankees in general. To be fair, we all need to return to that southern-based way of thinking. So after the TVs had been saturated, they started subverting these things slowly, and you just boil the frog, and next thing you know, it's like sex and drugs and immorality and tribe mixing type of stuff gets more commonplace in these TV shows. And suddenly you realize, like, oh, everything, politics downstream from culture, everything is downstream from the propaganda coming out of TV. The power of the TV. Oh, kids go to liberal schools where they're, indoctrinated for I don't know how many hours a day, and then they come home and watch an hour of TV. It's like, oh, well, the TV is just pure brainwashing propaganda. It's just absolute nonsense. It wasn't all propaganda. I mean, it's all propaganda in a way, but it wasn't all evil all the time. It's just they sneak it in here and there where people had noticed a shift of TV from the 50s, and then suddenly in the 60s when it hit saturation, the subverters, these pesky subverters, went in there and they started to slowly boil the frog with even something as innocuous and harmless as Bewitched and those kind of shows, or Archie Bunker. It's like, oh yeah, we went from laughing at the liberals to slowly turning around and laughing at the patriarch. Like, oh, how did this happen? Just to thinking witchcraft is suddenly cute. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nonsense. It's not that witchcraft is real. It's kind of the concept of moving away from a patriarchal structure to give power to women, which, if you're a woman, you're hearing this, you're like, you're on thin ice, buddy. Society works better under a patriarchy, where women don't have as much agency. I know that's a tricksy thing to say. Keeping barefoot pregnant. It's a different topic to explore. One that probably would be better for based women to explore. But to shift power away from like analytical thinking men who can make kind of colder decisions when necessary to emotional women who are, it's just a question of probabilities. Like you go, oh, men over time make more decisions more often than women over time. So you really want to have a structure based on like calm, Christian European men who have a higher probability of, or just European men in general, conservative European men have a higher probability of making better decisions more often. It's just that, scattershot probability maps and drawing correlation lines through it. Like, yeah, you can have a matriarchal society, but it's just not going to be as strong as a patriarchal society. It is what it is, and I know the 19th Amendment was a mistake. Yep. There's no way to go around that. If there's a binary between giving women the vote or not, then yeah, it was a mistake. Anyway, so even literal Satanists, globalist Satanists, Levay, no, he's not French, he's Jewish, is warning you that the real Satanists control the TV. And he's right. So the birth of the TV was a magical event foreshadowing with satanic significance. The first commercial broadcast, 1939, World Fair. Since then, TV's infiltration has been so gradual, so complete, that no one even noticed the slowly boiling frog. People don't need to go to church anymore. And this is a Jewish guy who's telling you this. They get their morality plays on television. What began modestly as rabbit ears on top of TVs are now satellite dishes, antennas, privately dominating the skyline, replacing crosses on top of churches. This is a Jewish guy who's warning you about the real Satanism. The TV set or satanic family altar has grown more elaborate since the early 50s, from the tiny fuzzy screens to huge entertainment centers covering entire walls with several TV monitors. Started as an innocent respite from everyday life, has become in itself replacement for real life for millions. For millions, a major religion of the masses, the opiate of the masses. The clergy of the TV religion are those entertainers, newscasters in particular, who nightly spread the word from their cathode ray pulpit. A literal Jewish Satanist is warning you about the real Satanists who are controlling these brainwaves. I don't know if this is too much for YouTube. We'll find out. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, support channel, small donation on CashApp, Coffee, Subscribestar. If I get 3 more subscribers, I move up to the next level. Or crypto, if you're one of those privacy-minded. I have Monero, which is allegedly the most private crypto, and people have donated. That's very kind of you. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, join the Odyssey, the Bit Chute, and the Telegram, and I will see you guys all next episode.